welcome to Surf's Up, a Beach Boys podcast safari. My name is Mark Dillon, and I'm joined by my partner, Phil Miglioratti. Hi, Phil.
Hello, Mark.
Phil runs the Pray for Surf podcast and blog, and I've been his guest many times, and we've had such a great time talking about all things Beach Boys that we decided to branch out on a separate venture. This is our first installment, so thank you for joining us. You can find all our podcasts archived on the Surf's Up, a Beach Boys podcast safari Facebook page. And we're starting this new adventure off with a bang. We have a very special guest who many Beach Boys fans will know, and that is Mr. David Leaf. David was a Beach Boys fan from New York State who moved to California in the mid-1970s and launched the acclaimed Pet Sounds fanzine in 1977, and then soon after that followed up with a great book that had a big influence on me and many others called The Beach Boys and the California Myth. And David went on to do many things with Brian Wilson and the band, including being one of the writers on the TV special The Beach Boys, 25 Years Together. He wrote the press notes for Brian's debut solo album and the liner notes for Capitol Records' Beach Boys CD releases, co-produced the Good Vibrations 30 Years of the Beach Boys and Pet Sound Sessions box sets, wrote and produced the TV special, an all-star tribute to Brian Wilson, directed the wonderful 2004 documentary Beautiful Dreamer about the making of the Smile album. Some of his other great documentaries include the U.S. versus John Lennon and The Night James Brown Saved Boston. And he's currently an adjunct assistant professor at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music, focusing on songwriters on songwriting. And we welcome Mr. David Leaf. Hi, David.
Hey, thanks. I think I need to hire you as my publicist.
You're on.
Great to be with you guys.
Thank you, David. We appreciate it.
In regards to your teachings, who have been some of the great guests you've been able to bring for your students?
It's been a terrific time at UCLA, and I feel like I'm just getting started, even though I've been teaching there since 2010. But I teach a class called Docs That Rock, Docs That Matter, about music documentary. So for that course, I've had some terrific filmmakers like the Academy Award-winning documentary maker Morgan Neville, which is particularly relevant because he did a great 2-hour A&E biography on Brian Wilson back in the 1990s. Steve Binder has been there, again, a Beach Boy connection. He directed the Tammy Show. Right. As well as Denny Tedesco, who directed the Wrecking Crew documentary. So those are three direct connections to this world. In my songwriting class, which I do sort of like inside the actor's studio, where I bring great songwriters in and interview them. The difference is they either are at the piano, or have their guitar, or both, and I kind of talk them through their musical life. And the first year I taught the class, week one I had Mike Stoller of Lieber and Stoller, then Jimmy Webb, then Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil, then Lamont Dozier and Mac Davis. So that class has been just, a thrill every week. Randy Newman, Burt Bacharach, just amazing songwriters who contemporary and legendary.
That is fantastic.
Have come to that class, and right now I'm teaching for the very first time a course called The Real Beatles, REEL, about the Beatles as kind of experience through television, promotional film, feature films, documentaries, concert specials, etc. And for this class, I've had guests like Peter Asher. So it's great work. It's very satisfying. It's a lot of fun. It's inspiring to be around these great creative people and have them share their stories with the students at UCLA.
Do you think Brian would be comfortable coming in and talking about songwriting?
I didn't ask him. I've done it with him in the past. I remember sitting down. You mentioned the Good Vibrations box set. I think that's when he and I sat down with cameras rolling, him at the piano, to talk him through his songs. And it was okay. It was good, but he's not really a public performer.
Right.
And I have a lot of ham in me. I don't think he has any ham. And so it's not something that I felt like I really wanted to put him through. In my documentary class, I always show Beautiful Dreamer.
I'm sure Brian's consumed a lot of ham, though, in his life. There's got to be a lot of ham in Brian, I would think.
We'll leave it at that, yes.
Well, if we could sort of take a trip down memory lane,
Sure.
You know, the Pet Sounds fanzine is a bit ahead of my time as a Beach Boys fan, but I know Phil is sitting on a bunch of copies as we speak.
Oh my God!
Yeah, I am. I found them, of course, in a cave with some prehistoric Neanderthal man stuff. I'm your age. I'm a few years older than you, David. So we go way back to some of the early '60s concerts. I'm sure you were at some of those in New York. I was in Chicago. And,
well, I wasn't cool enough to go early on. The first time I saw them was Thanksgiving Eve, 1967.
Well, that's okay. That's early enough. That's good
the opening acts were the Strawberry Alarm Clock and the Soul Survivors.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And what I remember about that was when the Beach Boys finished their, 20, 25-minute set, my friends got up to leave, and I said, "Where are you going?" I thought it was intermission. I didn't know the concert was over. It's the first concert I'd been to, and it was like, what do you mean it's over? They only played like 25 minutes.
A lot changed in concerts in about 3 or 4 years' time.
Yeah, no, I saw them at Georgetown University in the fall of '71, and the show with all the encores went well over 2.5 hours, including the crowd refusing to leave, and Jack Riley finally coming out and saying, "The guys appreciate it, but they're done. They got nothing left to give."
I really regret never seeing any of those shows.
Yeah, they were amazing. I mean, it was the sound enveloped you. It was like, and I know that other rock groups have this kind of response from people, but it was just a wonderful feeling of a joyous community. And for those of us who maybe knew a little bit of the background, it added to some of the drama. It was Dennis playing drums, or hey, is that Bruce in his shorts, or whatever, those kinds of silly things that fans do. I didn't mean his undershorts, I meant his Bermuda shorts. But anyway, so back to those Pet Sounds fanzine. I mean, I clutched those. Besides articles that would appear, Crawdaddy or Rolling Stone, as great as those were good journalism and good analysis. I mean, you brought a bunch of stuff together. That kind of research, if you will, the context, the background stories. Fanzine's probably the technical name for it, but it really was meant to be what I think would have developed had you kept going much longer, into a serious journal looking at the music, the life, the times of the Beach Boys. And that's my sense of how, I know you've done much more than Beach Boys, but your Beach Boy gifts that you've given to the fan community have been great. And so
thank you very much.
But what I want to do is to ask you, there's a book out by the title, Why the Beach Boys Matter? And there's no one better who can really answer that question than you. Could you take this class and just talk to us about really what is it about the Beach Boys that makes them matter? Everybody loves their favorite group and their songs and all that kind of stuff, but there's something different. There's something else. That's why we're having this, this crazy podcast. Is that a question you can answer, or
I'll give you an answer. Whether there's nothing definitive about the answer, but in thinking about it the way you just asked it, what strikes me, and I don't think I've thought of it this way before. Perhaps no group did the following things: gave us immeasurable musical magic, disappointed us so much, left so much unfulfilled promise, and are still around.
Wow.
And of course, no group that I can think of had Mozart in it. So, I think those are kind of those are the thoughts that come off the top of my head when you say, what is it about them that's different? Because the Beatles, rest in peace. It's now, their last album came out in 1969, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, the Beach Boys are still out there doing it.
You said they're disappointments. The fact that they disappointed us, I don't know if that made them more human than other people or other rock groups, I don't know. But it, at least for guys like me who are fanatic fans, we wanted to know about who they were. Not, what their favorite ice cream was, but what do they think? And why this song, and what's causing Brian to emote these things on Pet Sounds, and certainly other guys on other songs. So that I think you hit a key there, that they've disappointed us, and not that they have to ask our forgiveness, but that makes them very human.
They're prisoners of their own early success, maybe to some extent. I mean, the great resurgence of the oldies in the 1970s, they just had a hard time dealing with that and figuring out a direction beyond that point. I mean, it was looking back a lot more than it was looking forward, and I think that's why a lot of the records were disappointing.
I don't know if they had a hard time figuring out a direction. I think, it was pretty clear from a commercial point of view, the direction was towards a set list filled with Endless Summer. There was an internal battle in the group, say between Carl and Mike, I think, as to how far to go in that direction. Carl did want to do fewer oldies, is my sense of it. But, we're talking about, it's over 40 years ago.
Yeah.
The last contemporary tour feels like Keeping the Summer Alive, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Do people still approach you about your book all these years later? I'd just like to say, and I get into it a bit in my own book, how big this book was for me. I got it when I was 10 years old, and obviously a lot of it was over my head, but I held on to it, and I would reference it over the years, and as I got more interested in music, it really lit a fire in terms of the Pet Sounds era, and I couldn't even find Pet Sounds at any record store anywhere at that point. Smile, this whole mythological thing I thought we would never hear, and the work that came after. There'd never really been an in-depth journalistic look at the band in book form. So yeah, I'm wondering, if you still hear from people about it, and what would you say is the main point you were trying to get across in that endeavor?
Every now and again, I do hear from somebody. It was happening a lot more in the late '90s. When I was on tour with Brian, I would meet a lot of people. I don't hear too much about the book, but then again, just the other day at my class at UCLA, Elliot Easton of the Cars was as a guest.
Wow.
And he was telling me how much, he was talking to me about the book. It's a long time ago. I wrote that book in 1977.
I've been rereading it, David, for this conversation, and certainly things that have transpired since you couldn't have in there, and you even had some questions about would Smile come out, obvious things that you'd ask in 1977 and even later in '85. But what you said about what was the story, the true, this is real life, this is real time, that stuff is still compelling reading, and I think your analysis is right on.
Well, thank you very much. I had occasion to read the introduction of the book recently. Somebody had said something to me about it, and I read it, and I was kind of like, wow, I had a lot of nerve.
Well, that too. Yes, that too.
You were young when you wrote it.
I was 25.
That's amazing.
Well, it's amazing in one sense, but when you think that Paul McCartney was like 22 when he wrote Yesterday, it's not that amazing.
Right.
In your 20s is I think it's typical. That's the era when you're at your perhaps boldest and most creative.
Well, then what do we have to look forward to?
Social Security? Oh, you don't get that in Canada.
And so
no. I continue to create and make movies and write, and it's with a different. I hate to use the word a maturing passion, but it's with the kind of the wisdom of experience. I think it's easier having done something once or twice or 10 times that you can do it again. On the other hand, something has to really kind of, quoting a different group's lead singer, light my fire to make me want to spend 6 months or a year on a project.
Well, you updated your book in 1985, and so much has happened since then, and you've been in Brian Wilson's world. Will we ever get another update from you or another book about this subject?
In a funny kind of way, I felt like the book was updated every year from 85 to around 2005, and by that I mean it feels like every year, starting with the 25th anniversary special in 86, there was some Beach Boys or Brian Wilson project or another for which I wrote something, whether it was liner notes or a script for a documentary or a television special, or the All-Star tribute. It feels like I was kind of rewriting the book and adding to the book. I think one of the things that I know was a gigantic effort. Maybe the longest press kit in history at its time was the press kit for his solo album in '88. I know when I wrote the essays for the tour booklets in 2000, 2001, that I was conscious of what I had written before and trying to find a new way to tell the story. Certainly with the Pet Sounds box set, that was a really deep dive into the subject. And with the Smile movie, it was how do you tell this whole story? And so I really had to kind of breeze through giant sections with, I think there's a montage cut to the song Till I Die that covers about 25 years.
Right.
So I feel like, in a sense, the book has been updated. Maybe one day I'll teach a class on Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys and update it then. Who knows?
I mean, you were there for a lot of Brian's triumphs. I mean, and I think you've written about this before. I mean, things were kind of depressing. It was depressing being a Beach Boys fan in the mid-'80s. I mean, they had the one album out in '85, but there wasn't really a whole lot going on. Brian wasn't really doing a whole lot. There wasn't a lot of cause for optimism. Like, we kept hearing about Smile, but there was no news on that front, or there were little teases. And then the solo album came kind of out of nowhere to many fans and, blew people's minds. And I know you've written effusively about that. And then, I think you were there for this kind of reevaluation of the group, because you combine that solo album with the CD releases from Capitol, and all of a sudden, all these bands are being inspired by the Beach Boys.
Well, it's great to know that the songs reached, the records reached, a new generation. I had nothing to do with that. I just was fortunate enough that somebody I knew at Capitol Records asked me to do the liner notes. I think the music is the only thing that really matters when it comes down to it. Now, as fans, we always want to know more, and I think in the updated edition of the book, which now I wrote that update in 1984, so we're talking about 35 years ago. My sense of it was, I wrote something about how I got too deep into the story and saw more human suffering than you want to know about in terms of an artist you love. But I remember, I live in Santa Monica, and so Dennis didn't die too far from here. I've been to some very sad events through the years. I remember seeing Carl, at the hospital just before he died. I mean, stuff like that. That's just, heartbreaking to see it all vanishing in front of your eyes.
But they're part of fans' lives every day. Like, it's actually the anniversary of Carl's death today, and all over Facebook, everyone's remembering him. Like, they're still with us.
Well, that's the thing about great art, is that it survives, and I think I probably owe a lot of my sense of art to my late wife, because she would talk about Michelangelo and Da Vinci and Gershwin, and I always wanted Brian and the Beach Boys to be thought of in that manner as something that was forever, and that was part of what drove me was that this stuff is important. It goes back to your question you asked earlier, and they were being dismissed by critics. They were being derided, and what they created was so important, so influential, so timeless that the missteps and the misadventures sometimes overshadow it.
David, you just said timeless. 20 years from now, 25 years from now, when, of course, but I don't think any of the originals, maybe none of us, the three of us, will be around. Can you speculate as to how they will be viewed? Will the things that you talked about, the tragedies, the Manson stuff, all the stuff surrounding their music, will that become less important and the music become more revered? I'm not trying to tell you what to say, but how would you see how people would talk about them and their music?
I think the music will be revered. I don't know if it'll be more revered. It'll be influential. Will it be as influential? That's hard to say. One of the things you take comfort from it when you create something is if one person tells you they liked it and it influenced them. And in this case, I'm thinking of somebody. I don't know if you've had him on your podcast, Darian Sahanaja.
Have not.
Well, you should. And what his story, and I'll let him tell it. But what he told me about reading my book and what that meant to him, well, that's pretty amazing. I know that there are the other people I've met, the late Tom Petty, Lindsey Buckingham. If you hear from one person that it mattered, then it does. And so we know the Beach Boys' music will matter for millions forever. And I really believe that all the personal stuff will vanish, because everybody's personal life has triumphs and tragedies in it. Theirs are magnified because they're on the world stage. 25 years from now, when we're all gone, maybe not Mark.
I hope we're all around.
Well, in terms of the creators of the Beach Boys, not the. They may be alive, but I doubt they'll be singing in 4-part harmony 25 years from now. So the Beach Boys as an institution will pass from our eyes, but then we see that with so many groups, the name carries on and the music is performed, and there's a Count Basie orchestra, right?
There you go.
Yep.
So why can't there be a Beach Boys that continues to play this music for the world? And by playing, the 24 hits that are so familiar, introduces people. And one of the things that's fascinating about young people is when they get into something, they really dive deeply into it. And so hopefully that will happen, and one of them will be inspired and create things that we never could imagine.
It's up to the older generations to sort of curate a little bit. I mean, my kids are just listening to. Essentially rap and hip hop and pop music. That's what they listen to. They're teenagers, But of course, I'm playing Beach Boys, introducing them, playing it in the car, and they're liking it. My son came along to the Brian Wilson show a few months ago, and he dug it. So, as long as somebody there, the mega fans are there, I guess, to lead on the younger ones, then then they're going to love it. I mean, Phil, I just want to say quickly to your point about the drama and all that. I don't think, on the whole, the drama of the Beach Boys' lives is something that most people that listen to the Beach Boys are aware of. You know, when I go see Mike Love and Bruce Johnston, I saw them in Cape Cod a number of years ago. I don't think people there are even conscious of who's an actual Beach Boy and who's not, and why is Brian Wilson not there. They're really enjoying the music. You know, I mean, if they want to dive deeper, they can. But I think they're just there for a good time.
I'd agree with that.
I think
I don't think it was any different 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago. I'm not even sure. It certainly wasn't true in the 60s. Maybe there was a period in the late 60s, early 70s when everybody was on stage except Brian, and they were still very young and creative and vital and evolving from Sunflower through Holland, that it was different. But it feels like they haven't been a contemporary force in music for so long that what you said about not knowing who's an original Beach Boy and who isn't and all of that, that's been true for a long, long time. And I'd say certainly since Carl's passing, it's nobody's saying, hey, there's no Wilsons on stage. They're going to see the Beach Boys, and the Beach Boys is a feeling and it's a sound.
Well, I doubt that you are in conversations like this, but the Brain Trust, Brother Records, whoever decides on licensing and that kind of thing, and there's only one Count Basie orchestra, so I'm assuming they're thinking about these questions. How do we protect what you just said? People won't say there aren't any Wilsons on stage, but it's the sound, it's the music, it's the joy that it brings.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of asking a question you can't answer.
Well, it's actually it's a big part. A big part of the music business now is brand management, if you will.
Okay.
Legacy management, and there's whole companies set up to that manage Prince, the Prince estate, Michael Jackson estate, the Otis Redding estate, the Janis Joplin estate, and on and on and on. And so there are people who that's what they do. They think about all this.
Well, at the time you wrote your book, did people know the Brian Wilson story, or was that part of your motivation to bring this to light, exactly what he meant to the group? I mean, when I was a kid and I got my first greatest hits package, I looked on the back and they have the songwriting credits, and I didn't know those were songwriting credits. I thought that was who the vocalist was, because I'm like, I don't care who wrote the song, I just care who sings the songs.
I think the opening section of the book makes it really clear what the motivation of the book was in terms of my concern for Brian Wilson. Before it kind of flashes back to tell the story when it describes what's going on stage at a concert circa 1977. I think that's as good a statement of my motivation as it's any better than anything I could say. I certainly felt that by the time I wrote the book that they had fallen out of critical favor. I mean, if I remember correctly, Rolling Stone named Holland Album of the Year.
One of the top 5. That's right.
Yeah, and so how in 5 years did they go from that to kind of being, I don't know, they suddenly they were an oldies act.
Yeah,
and so I think part of the motivation of the book, certainly part of the motivation of the Pet Sounds newsletter, was to treat them with respect and tell their story in a way that properly contextualized the music inside their lives without the lives overwhelming the story. But the lives often did overwhelm the story, so it couldn't be avoided.
How much would you say the myth of Smile inspired and sustained your interest in Brian and the group?
Well, it certainly inspired it. There would not have been a book if not for the myth of Smile. I mean, it was wanting to hear Smile that kind of drove it all.
Right.
That drove everybody. I think who would say whether I still am or not, it's a different question. But being a Beach Boys fanatic in the '70s, the Smile was the holy grail, and it was hearing Surf's Up and thinking, oh my God, there's an entire album of music like this? I've got to hear that. And so one of the things that I did that I was really most proud of was getting something like 45 minutes of Smile music onto the Good Vibrations box set.
Right.
And in chronological context. So you went from Pet Sounds to Good Vibrations to Smile, and then I think on disc 5 there was even some Smile outtakes as well. But it was the first time the Smile music had been in one place as an official release, and it was remarkable. We're talking, it's over 25 years ago that box set came out. I mean, I was really proud of the fact that and I added it up at one time, but something like 40% of the music on the box had never come out before.
Wow.
And
yeah, that was a great box set. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, and we had just done the twofers, so we had put a lot of unreleased stuff on those. So to do the box and get all that music in sequence, in the best available sound and all that, it felt very important.
We talked a bit about some of Brian's triumphs, and I mean, certainly one of them was, at age 62, I think it was, finishing the Smile album with his band, putting it out, and it was fantastic, and you were there for that, you were filming that. I'm wondering how willing he was to sort of expose himself in that documentary, and I'm also wondering if there are any fantastic outtakes that did not make it into the final cut.
Oh my God. Why don't you start a lobbying effort to do a box set of the film? I mean, there's so much stuff. Not to mention the entire concert from London. There's endless great stuff. And I remember in the editing room looking at a cut with Pete Lynch, who's a brilliant young man. Who edited that, and the U.S. versus John Lennon, and the James Brown film, and who was Harry Nilsson, a great smart guy, and we had finished a cut of Beautiful Dreamer that was about an hour 52, hour 53, somewhere around there, and I said to him, we watched it, and I said, Pete, everything is working. There isn't a sequence that isn't working, but overall I think the movie's too long. And I think if we can cut 5 or 10 minutes out of it, it'll feel 20 minutes shorter. And that's just a feeling that came from having spent a lifetime in editing rooms. And so we did cut some great stuff just in that last gasp of trimming the movie that was wonderful. There's piles of stuff. I mean, we were at rehearsal every day for, I don't know, a month.
There's so many other topics that we'd love to talk with you about. We think those who listen to this podcast are very serious about it and seriously interested in that. So we'll talk offline and hope to be able to do a part 2 with you. But we just, at this point, want to say thank you. You have been, I know that you've got all these different roles that you've played, liner note writer, this kind of thing, movie producer. But I think all along the way you've been an advocate, certainly for Brian, and I think it came at a time where that helped get the Beach Boys back. I'm going into something too deep here for the final statement here, but anyway, I just think the timing of what you did when you did it has been critical all the way. So thank you for being an advocate for Brian, for the Beach Boys, and I'll just say for me in a sense, because I think I represent a lot of folks who don't get to write stories and don't get to do filming of rehearsals. And, these guys have made a difference in my life and their music. And so thank you for being part of keeping it alive and having this conversation with us today.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's very, very kind of you to say. I really don't feel any different than any other fan, other than I was so kind of determined to get behind the scenes and do that I devoted a significant amount of my life to it. I kind of, my guiding principle is like, what did I want to see as a fan? And I think that
that
may be what drove the conception and realization of each project.
Well, thank you, David. Mark, anything before we sign off?
I just want to thank you, David, for certainly being a big inspiration on my passion for the Beach Boys and for speaking with us today.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure, and we'll do it again soon to use a Beach Boy title.
I love it. Thanks.
Thanks, man.